Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the KLNS Rugby Podcast as we look back on a pretty miserable night in Dublin where Rieko Ioane wrote a chapter of his book. Damian McKenzie finally showed his class and Ireland went down easier than we have seen before. With me on this pretty damp Sunday morning to reflect on a poor evening in Lansdowne Road are Irish fans and podcast regulars Pádraig Kelly and Eric Fitzgerald. Gentlemen, it's great to have you back on. How's things with you?
Good, thanks very much. It's a great. It's a Sunday. That's all it is, really, isn't it? It's hard to be energetic after a game like that on Friday.
It's a very Sundaying Sunday, and at least we have Scotland, South Africa tonight to look forward to.
Oh, wonderful.
And if we wrap up this quickly, we'll have at least like something fun in Wales and Fiji to watch.
Yeah, I mean, that mightn't be fun if Wales win. I've kind of alluded to that. I did a podcast with Hugh Griffin, and I've alluded to that already. But kind of before we begin, just for everyone tuned in, we're going to run over all the main talking points where it went wrong for Ireland, set piece, the power game, things like that, tip on passes, the stats. But before we start, I just want a quick summation of the action for those who may have missed it. Although I'd say about 1 million people did watch it, but that's the only thing. Pádraig, would you like to kind of run through how the game went?
Like from my perspective, anyway, I thought Ireland actually started quite positively, controlling a bit of territory, kicking well. Like it seemed like a very like that typical smart Ireland build into a game. It wasn't as fast as we were being used to expecting, but it was something that I was like, okay, no, we're trending in the right way. Then a few cheap penalties, which I think the term cheap penalties now is going to be the kind of the highlight of the next 60 minutes of this game. Like let New Zealand back into the game, gave them position, gave them easy points, and it was kind of a weird first half from that point on because New Zealand just had all the ball, played really well, but Ireland looked relatively comfortable from my perspective. Like our defense was comfortable. Our decision making in defense, especially, was really good. Our blitz knew when to blitz. The outside knew when to drift. The scramble then behind working really hard. Like all those elements worked really well. But it was then, but the cheap penalties, the silly stuff, the not rolling out the way, the painting bad pictures for the referee let New Zealand into that game. And you kind of go in at half time. Sorry, I'm literally going through my notes trying to remember the score. But at half time, they kind of go in with the yellow card. Like Ireland hadn't fired a real shot, but didn't look. But New Zealand looked in control of how the game was trending, and that was kind of what was frustrating. The second half with the Barrett yellow, I once again that kicking law, lanes, penalty, line out maul. It's this whole thing of like the line out didn't work whatsoever, like which was really, really worrying. The scrum held its own. I think everyone with Tyke Furlong injured, everyone was worried about Finlay Bealon, which I always think is a annoying to me as a Connacht fan, but because he always delivers when he's in an Ireland jersey. But it was just this really weird thing of the only time New Zealand actually unlocked us was off a loose kick into midfield. They worked it around to the corner. Will Jordan then on the far side they scored a try and that's game over. So it's very easy in a game like that to kind of go. It's think of doom and gloom, but it was certain things malfunctioning, certain things not working well, the handling being as poor as it was, the because how we played in defense really frustrated New Zealand. Like our ruck work was incredible. We had them six and sevens. They're always going backwards. Yes, it led to all those penalties, but I think that was more jacklers and tacklers that rolling away than the counter rucking, which was superb. But yeah, it was just a really weird game. New Zealand deserved their win. Like I think at the end of the day, you've got to start with that point. New Zealand deserved their win, but they looked if 5% Ireland get better, like if Ireland go from a 6 out of 10 on average to a 7 out of 10 average, I think we win that game. It's cut out the handling errors, cut out those small little things across the board, and it's a different story. That's how, but that's the standard of the top five teams in the world. You have one small slip, you get beaten. It's a much better place than New Zealand or Ireland or South Africa or France beating everyone around them for constantly. It's nice to have that kind of over and back.
Yeah, and I 100% agree. Like, I think it was one of the things that I kind of took away from this game was if Ireland play like that against any of the top four teams in the world, they don't win because it's just that collection of things. Set piece, territory battle. They missed a lot of tackles. They did scramble well. They scrambled really well in defense. They missed a good few tackles. There were some cheap, kind of, silly penalties, needless penalties that Ireland have given away a lot this year. They were, you know, they led the Six Nations in penalties conceded. So discipline has been a bit of an issue. But then at the same time, like it was a bit of a night for the purists. It was one of those where it could go either way very, very quickly with a couple of different things. Thought the kicking game went well. As you said, the scrum did hold up its own for large parts. It certainly started to fade as, you know, like Finlay Beano at 78 minutes. He's obviously going to tire, and that made a difference, especially against someone like Tunga Fassi. And there's that element. But Eric, I'll let you in here. Like New Zealand, they were probably the better team on the overall. They probably did deserve the win. But the 10-point margin, what did you think of it? Because you were there. So what was your initial thoughts?
I actually thought that ultimately the 10-point margin was a fair enough reflection of the game. And I think a lot of where that came from was New Zealand boxed far clever than Ireland, far more clever than Ireland did. And in fact, kind of thinking of a way to describe that performance, it felt to me like New Zealand played against Ireland the way Ireland would have played against New Zealand maybe about 3 or 4 years ago, in the sense that like they played very low error margin game. They kicked every single penalty that they possibly could in terms of just keeping the score ticking over. Like when you consider that Damian McKenzie scored 6 penalties out of 7 in the course of that game versus 2 for Jack Crowley and 1 conversion. New Zealand just took every single opportunity they could to keep the scoreboard moving and to keep kind of building up that lead or putting the pressure on Ireland. Like as Pádraig alluded to there, and I think Caelan, you described it as it was one for the purists. Like it wasn't a game with a whole hell of a lot of flashpoints. A lot of it was played between the two 22s. And I think it wasn't a game that had like really huge storyline moments. It actually felt quite routine for New Zealand in the end. And I think a lot of what Scott Robertson has done with New Zealand in terms of really stripping them back to their set piece and focusing on set piece being excellent. Like I thought their scrum was incredibly solid, but so was ours. And I mean, like as Padraig pointed out there, like credit to Finlay Bealham, there was a lot of column inches spent on discussing like what would he be like as a replacement for Tyke Furlong. And as Padraig alluded to, he did exactly what he's always done when he's come in an Ireland jersey. He's done well. But I ultimately think that in the modern game, the most important set piece that you have running well is your line out. And I think New Zealand's line out was impeccable. They disrupted our throw. I think the stat you discussed with me there, Kaelan, was we only won 7 out of 10 lineouts. And that's below like elite level operation in terms of what you need, particularly for a team like Ireland that is quite baked into launching strike plays from set piece. So I think New Zealand did everything they could in terms of disrupting our possession, disrupting our flow, but crucially just taking their opportunities whenever they took it. I think, to be honest with you, we have maybe gotten Ireland, and when I say we, I mean Ireland, have probably gotten a little bit high on their own supply when it comes to playing the All Blacks. Like the aura of the All Blacks has definitely diminished for Ireland in the last number of years, having won a Test series down there, having beaten the All Blacks twice at home, that Chicago win. Um, so I think we try and play with a bit more confidence, a bit more swagger against the All Blacks. We look to kick for the corner, whereas previously we might have kicked threes. Whereas the All Blacks really pared it down, just focused on eking every single opportunity that they could out of the game. And ultimately that stood them in good stead.
Absolutely did. And ultimately, one of the big stats that's popping up in rugby nowadays, as it gets more territory based and it gets more attacking, is points per 22 entry. Now, it'd be handy if I had that one on me. I don't, but it was something we discussed before we hit record. Ireland, in the tight exchanges, once they got to the 22 and they're looking to come around the corner and hit those one-off carries, they weren't getting as much change as, say, New Zealand. New Zealand didn't need to, though, because they managed to get a couple of penalties. Like there was a scrum infringement, there was 3 or 4 breakdown infringements, there was one for a play in the 9, like, and those 6 penalties add up. And like hindsight is a wonderful thing, but when you see Damian McKenzie and the ball fall off the tee and he steps back over it and he nails it, it's moments like that that afterwards you're like, it's not your night. But it's testament to Damian McKenzie and how good he was on the night as well.
New Zealand only got 9 points. Sorry, 11 points in from their 22 entries. You know, like we actually held them out. It was all the penalties from between the 22 and the halfway line that cost us. You know, there's They had 4 from outside in that area, where 2 were in the 22, and they scored that one try from the loose kick, like I said. So it's kind of like I think they had to kick those points because our defense was so good. We were giving them the ball. Our maul defense worked when they tried to go for those into the corner. They didn't want to take us on. They were like, this Irish defense won't fall for our tricks. They were really good disruptors. I was mentioned to you earlier on. If you looked at New Zealand last week, they were getting pinged for tackling off the ball. Or this week, they just ran into the person who was going to be the +1 pass. He was getting that +1 pass. So they weren't doing anything illegal, but they were definitely stifling our attack just by doing those things. They boxed smart, they played smart, and we didn't adjust.
That's a massive factor of it as well, because that's something we've said about New Zealand for 20 years, is that they play the game that's in front of them in their own regard. And like their settled phase play in attack has not been great over the kind of opening Scott Robertson era. But at the same time, as you see, like all it takes is Mark to lay down the touchline with some support line, and next thing you're stretched, and next thing you're scattered, and it's McKenzie trying to skip pass, a brilliant skip pass to Almua. It's 3v2. That's the game winner. And like that's what they can do when they got the likes of Talia and Jordan and even, Barrett and Ioane in the centre. But kind of on a grander scale than Porrick, like where do you think it did go wrong? Because there would be a lot said. I think the power battle was important, but as you said, they did, just to stop Ireland from throwing those tip-on carries or tip-on passes. Line-out was certainly an issue. 30 missed tackles is a lot, no matter how good your scramble is. But what is it for you? Where is the first bit of the unraveling for you?
I think the line out is key. I think as someone who supports Munster, I'm going to say this. You've seen the stats on what a line out can do for you. Like 70% you're at this level, 80% you're this level. Internationals 88 to 93. That's kind of where you need to be at. At 70%, you're well off where you need to be at on what is the key platform for attack. Then after that, it's the handling errors. Like there was just too many drop balls across the 23. I just like Ireland conceded 10 turnovers, but the handling errors, which I've lost the hand here. It's like, sorry, there's 11 bad passes. I think that's what the stats have called them as. If that's on top of 10 turnovers. So you're talking, that's 21 instances where you're possibly giving away the ball or not doing well with the ball. And that's the type of stuff that was annoying me watching it. It was bad passing to the inside shoulder, like people having to reach back, reach down, reach forward, I coach. I tell everyone, pass the ball where you want the person to be, not where they are. And there's a bit too much of passing the ball to where the person was when whoever was passing the ball. We'll say Gibson Park, who had a very good game actually from an Irish point of view. He can really hold his held up high. It was almost when him or Crowley or Frawley or Bundy or Gary were getting the ball, taking that look, they were passing to the position where the player was when they looked, not that 1 foot in front, so they're getting out in front of them. It's that type of stuff. It was small stuff, but at an international level, the small stuff really builds up to lack of cohesion, lack of flow, all those kind of buzzwords that you hear. But what that is poor passing, poor this, poor that, and because of those things, the crowd can't get into the game because the game doesn't start, doesn't get moving, doesn't go. Like these are pros. Most of them live in Ireland. Greasy weather shouldn't make a difference. So it's all this type of stuff that doesn't help. But I think by kind of looking for those small things and what Ireland doing, you kind of pull back from what New Zealand did well, which was they disrupted our phase play out in the phases, whereas we tried to disrupt them at ruck time, and we both disrupted each other really well. They just survived it better.
Yeah, one thing you kind of touched there on cohesion, Padraig, and I suppose that is a very it is kind of one of those really overused buzzwords in rugby analysis, but it is important to acknowledge that like this is this Irish team's first match together in, is it 4 months, 5 months since the South Africa test?
Yeah.
Whereas New Zealand are coming off the back of a rugby championship campaign. They played, now look, it was a facile win against Japan, and that's ultimately just so we can sell more Lip of Vitamin D in New Zealand. But there was definitely a game sharpness there, a match sharpness that isn't there for the Northern Hemisphere sides when we get into the November tests. But at the same time, particularly when you consider that the vast majority of this team is selected from one province, you would expect there to be an element of cohesion almost cheesed into, like baked into the squad rather, or like you're nearly cheesing cohesion through Farrell's selection policy. But would agree with you there. I thought in particular as well, there were a couple of examples of passes, like you mentioned, passing to like where the guy was as opposed to where he should be. There was also an element of a few passes that went into a guy that was maybe a foot taller than the person who was supposed to be receiving it. There was a lot of plucking passes out of the air, and it's like the margins you're talking about at a game, like at the game at the elite level, like that second that's lost to like pull down, reshuffle, like that second lost of momentum can be so crucial in terms of kicking something off. But it is important. It is always like important to acknowledge with the November tests that like this is in effect the beginning, quote unquote, of our international season in the Northern Hemisphere, whereas it's kind of the midpoint for if not towards the end for the Southern Hemisphere teams.
And it's important. I think the passing point is really good because if you take the 2 10s, and we won't get into a 10 debate because, you know, we don't have Matt Williams here for unbiased analysis on 10s, but if you want to take it, like Gibson Park's pass to Crowley, the Crowley knocks on, is a poor pass by Gibson Park standards. Like he's able to throw 20-yard passes, you know, at times he's really good at them. Frawley had a pass to Henderson, which, as you said, Park, is a perfect example of where he was as opposed to where he will be, and he's reaching back and he kind of, you know, scuffs it. And it's just Ireland haven't made those errors consistently as much in a game as they did the last day. You think back to the France game in Marseille, where like Bundy's running support lines and the offloads are sticking, and like Robbie Henshaw, that brilliant offload off the ground to Doris for the Nash try, and you got all these. And that's probably the one thing I will say about, like, you know, it's our first game back, but at the same time, first game back in the last couple of years has actually been better than this. You know, it was in previous Novembers, it was in previous Six Nations. I think that's where that frustration kicks in. I said before, I don't really judge the South African series. Everyone was tired. It was a long season. We've seen that in the games. They were intense, but they, you know, the standard rugby wasn't always brilliant for the 80 minutes. But that leads to that frustration. And we kind of touched on set piece. So, Eric, just on the defense, like Ireland did have a couple of lapses, relatively strong for the last 20 meters or the last 22, last 30 meters, whatever it might be. There was a couple of lapses. There was 30 missed tackles, and ultimately, it's kind of the trade-off when you go against a team like New Zealand. You want to shut them down at source. You will miss a few, but at the same time, they have the ability to just get past you then.
Of course they have, because they have some incredibly powerful carriers of the ball. I mean, you know, when you're up against Satiti and Savea in a back row carrying into you the whole time, like, I mean, you are there. Like they had us comprehensively beaten on the power game, to my mind, and like even a lot of our typical strong carriers that you would expect to carry into contact had very quiet nights, or were scragged down without getting too many meters at the gain line. Um, like I think Padraig alluded to it there though. Defensively, we ultimately didn't have that bad of a game in terms of 11 points only 11 points coming from inside New Zealand's 22. I thought where we were quite poor was our smartness and our smartness around the ruck, and I thought we gave away a few silly penalties there. And to my watching of the game, I think Joe McCarthy was guilty of a few hot-headed moments in terms of either coming off the feet or not rolling away or going for a poach without the release. There were a few quite technical interpretations, I thought, like for example, I think it was Beelum got rolled for not rolling away, but yet he was in no way interfering with the presentation of the ball, or with the ability to clear out.
Is that the one where
That,
James Ryan got rolled on top of him?
I can't remember if James
no,
Ryan.
I think that
No,
was
I know
later.
it wasn't. He was cleanly, like, he was on the ground. He had his arms wrapped around the legs of the New Zealand carrier, textbook tackle, but he was literally on the right hand side of the ruck. There was a clear pathway through to the ball.
That one was so frustrating. And there was a few, because I know Ty Byrne got penalised for one in the, I'm going to say first half. I don't know what half it was. It was in one of the halves, where it looks like a pretty clean attempt to go at the ball. And it's like it's one of my bugbears. I know you referee, Eric. I know you could probably explain it better. Sometimes referees just give you too much time and too much time for something to happen in the ruck, and eventually gets penalized. I think that was in a big moment, but like New Zealand just seemed to get those moments. You think of Surveyor's turnover near the end, it almost felt typical of the game that when Ireland needed something, it was one of the best players in the world that came up with it. Unfortunately, it was Ardie Surveyor.
Yeah. Like, I can't speak to what it's like to referee in an elite level, and obviously, and I mean, I think the most elite game I've ever refereed in my life has been an under-18 school game. But there's so many mental computations that are required from a refereeing perspective when you look at a ruck. Like, you're straight in, you're like, okay, is the jackler on their feet? Is there room for contest there? Has the tackler rolled away? Who's coming in? Are they on their feet? And often it's about what area are you looking to focus on first. So you might kind of think to yourself, okay, in the last ruck there, I probably should have called roll away. So I'm going to watch the tackler now as I come into this one. And you're so busy watching the tackler that then you don't spot that the jackler has been like cleanly on their feet for about 3 seconds trying to rip the ball away. So it really is like, in my own admittedly like considerably lower level experience, there is an element of what element of the complex picture of the ruck are you looking at first when you go in there? And I'd say there was probably a bit of that at play for Nick Berry as well, because I completely agree with you. You'll often see in matches there's like one tug of the ball and then the referee pings for not releasing, and then in others you could be latched on for a good like 3 clean seconds, and the ref just allows you to be cleared off and allows play to continue on. Um, Actually, just something we were talking about before we started the call, and Pádraig, you alluded to it there about kind of like the picture that the referee was taking, and I think you were talking about something kind of that it wasn't necessarily the picture that immediately developed, but the picture that it developed into.
That was the famous scrum penalty on the 60th minute.
Yeah,
The Beadham Tunga Fassi one, which in fairness, in my opinion, I was like, I can see that being a 50-50. I see why he gives it, but it's one of those, it's the pic, as you said, the picture that develops into is the great word for it. Beadham goes in on the chase. Tunga Fassi is coming in. They're both in on the angle. It's one of those, it could very easily go Ireland's way. And in fairness, I go back to the Wales game. I did a kind of analysis in Ireland scrum that day where they absolutely monstered Wales. They got a couple of those calls, but unfortunately, this was not one the night where they got them.
Yeah, and I think on the scrum, I have now started because there's a lot of people, and when I say people, Irish fans who like to go after Porter for his scrummaging. Um, I was watching the New Zealand lose heads the whole way through. They set up the same way. They hitch their
Yeah.
hips. They take that step. There's now Porter is now a symptom of lots of people talking about how all loose heads set up. So it's kind of I feel for refs. There's so many things going on. I like the highest game I've refed is an under 14s match. I've done it. I've ran around. It's like you're kind of it's an impossible task. It is. And I've talked to refs and to ref and Connacht, and they go, materiality is a big thing they're told to focus on. So, like that one you're talking about, Finney Bims off to the side, he didn't stop a clear out, he didn't stop a jackal. So, materially, yes, he might be in a bad place, but he's materially not impacting what's going on. So, I know refs who wouldn't give that as a not rolling away penalty for that reason. It's like the offside in the 13 channel. Materially, that's not stopping a pick and go, but it's still offside. How much do you want to ping, whistle, and all this type of stuff? It's why over the last couple of years on social media I've stopped talking about refs, because you can't control what they see, you can control how you react. That's how I coach, that's how I treat these things, and that's how you have to play the game. We didn't react to what he was saying and seeing. New Zealand did. I think that's the big difference, really, in terms of how that game was refereed for me personally.
I'll open this up to both these, so because look, Ireland are a top team, so when they lose, there will be a bit of focus on the referee, which is fair enough because they're losing against small margins. Do you think there's a trend there that Ireland aren't reacting? Because there was talk about Wayne Barnes after the quarterfinal, where interpretations, and a little bit after the England game this year, and it's interpretation. Are Ireland adapting well enough, and in these situations, from your perspectives?
I just don't think Ireland are an adaptable team, full stop. I don't think we adapt to refs. I don't think we adapt to the pictures that are being painted on the pitch. I think in particular an example of that was what I saw as kind of almost like an over reliance on trying for the short tip pass to a forward coming up on the support line. and New Zealand had kind of twigged that very early into the game. You know, they're in terms of where they were with their supporting defender, like they were there all the time, ready for that second tackle to just kill that stone dead as soon as it happened. And our response was, well, let's do more of that, but try and do it harder. Um, so I don't think in terms of like the picture that gets painted in front of us, we get adapted. It was difficult to tell watching the game live in the stadium, like how Doris, like this was Doris's first game, I want to say, captaining Ireland. It was very difficult to tell what Doris was like in terms of trying to manage the referee as well. But I think historically, um, Ireland captains have been way too quiet with referees. When Sexton was captain, we had a big problem with Sexton just having like bad PR in terms of referees and having a really negative. Now, I suppose, you know, calling a referee a fucking cheat while you're on the pitch wearing your suit with your child, holding your child's hand will go a long way towards creating that negative PR image. But I wonder if we are. I don't think we're a very adaptable team tactically. So I think that will naturally bleed into. I don't think we're a very good team at adapting to referees' interpretations.
I
I might
think
just twig
Doris,
that part
sorry.
before you get in there, because it's a good point. Adaptability. Ireland get, like we said this in the preview. We said this last week, myself and yourself, Ron, with Jeff and Harp and Rugby. Ireland get in front, they stay in front, they smother you. They are the Irish team at their best, are holding a massive pillow over the opposition's head and they smother you to death. Is that a part of it, do you think?
There's an element of it's not. I don't think it's a team that's set up to chase. But I don't think South Africa's a team that's set up to chase. You know, it's that whole thing. And I think we had a bench that wasn't set up to chase. You know, we expect to be ahead. We expect to be 15, 20 points ahead. Bring on the subs, do more of the same. You know, so I think that's. I think there's something to be said for something like that, because that way, if it clicks, you then your game hits and you roll over a team anyway. You don't have to chase. You just play your game the whole way through. So it's how you want to play the game and how you want to set up your bench. It's a philosophy thing. I kind of like more the same myself, because all it takes is one person to get that pop pass. Everyone then raises their game, and suddenly the next 20 minutes you're flying. You know, it's that side of thing. Or you need someone on the bench. You kind of go, nope, this ain't working. Try this, and this now. And but it's philosophy. I think there's a lack of flexibility. I think that's why Andy Farrell likes players who can do two or three roles on the bench. Um, I think he now is starting to get the bench he wants, where you have someone who can come in at 12, 13, 15, 10, 12, 15. That's where he wants his bench to be. So he has that choice. I would hope in the next couple of years that we see, especially in the backs, that kind of ability to tweak and change as we go. As captains dealing with the ref, listening on, I think he was cordial. He talked his things through. He got his point across. I wouldn't say anything bad in that sense. I think there was a bit of too much elements of when those New Zealand tacklers outside the +1 were bumping into whoever was on the +1 pass. There was a bit too much looking to the ref or something. You know, there was that like that kind of looking over, like, oh, we're not getting a call here. Right. You know, like, but that will still go on in the second half. That side of it is different. It's a philosophy thing. Do you want to be able to change up your team with 15 minutes to go, or do you want more of the same? I think New Zealand are a change up type team. They like giving you different pictures. I personally, I think if you're showing someone a picture and then you have another 10 come on who does something else, it's because you've painted the picture A in the first half. You can now bring on picture B with that ground work laid. I don't think we do enough of just switching it a small bit when the subs come on to make the groundwork we do with picture A work as effectively.
And that's fair. And I do want to get your points on the power game and respecting the Irish carriers in the tip on game in a second. But before we move on, I'd like to remind everyone that if you do like what you see here, you can subscribe for unrivaled coverage of Ireland's Autumn Nation series. As much as this listenership would be down for this episode, I'm pretty sure after a loss. If you do comment, leave a review, it helps massively. And as November, you can support my November campaign, which is linked below as well. But Pádraig, on that, a big part of a game like this, when it becomes a little bit narrower and a little bit tighter and a little bit more intense, is how you win your collisions in midfield, your McCarthy's, your Ryans, your Dorises. Arguably, that's where you'd probably prefer to have Furlong over Beano in particular, because he's just that little bit more abrasive in the carry. But New Zealand, They didn't go after Ireland's ruck as much as we thought they would. They didn't go after the first out carrier. They went after the tip on game. And that is really what stymied Ireland at times.
And it wasn't through power they went after that tip on game. It was just through putting bodies in the channel, because like Ireland had more dominant tackles, 16-7. You know, like Ireland played more physically. I just think New Zealand played smarter, if that makes sense. They negated our strengths. They hit hard. Their double tackles just got people to ground quick. Um, they didn't go after our ruck, but our ruck ball wasn't super fast. I don't think power is as big a reason we lost as some of the other stuff, like the handing errors. The handing errors were unforced. You know, that was stuff like that was important. Our tip on games is very important to our phase play. Um, so we want to get outside that third, fourth, fifth defender. They were using that third or fourth defender as a blocking line. They were defending space, whereas which is typically not something Southern Hemisphere teams do. Josh Ioane's come up and going, well, they defend man on man normally, but they in this New Zealand team were defending space, which is very Northern Hemisphere of them. They are getting in that line, very South African of them. They're getting in those pockets of space, stopping us play our game. It wasn't powerful, it was smart. And I think too many people, it's too easy to just go, it's not just power. It's lots of little things. It's 10% power. It's 10% smart. It's 10% line out. It's 10%, 10%, 10%. And across those 10%, there's lots of, that's that 1 point of difference across a game. That goal brings you from a 6.5 to 7.5 to an 8.5 every single time you just chip away at those little 10%. But New Zealand has supreme carriers, though. Like when they got in those open channels, like, the line break stat is absolutely scary. Like 9 line breaks to 1, I think, is actually the biggest one. And you can tell they're getting their power carriers in open spaces. So they're not trying to carry hard through their forwards. They're going, let's carry hard at your 14, at your 10, at your 15. You know, that's where they're trying to really bring power to play.
I also think New Zealand have like the most terrifying back three in world rugby at the moment. Like Will Jordan, Mark Talea, and oh God, there I am making a point. I'm after forgetting the name. Caleb Clark. Yes, thank you. Like Talea, I remember him, and like I remember him just blossoming into an absolute superstar in the 2023 Rugby World Cup, and is just one of those typical, great, New Zealand have just like fished this guy out of nowhere and he's instantly a world-class talent. Will Jordan is such an incredible fullback. Like I would probably go so far as to say like one of, if not the best attacking fullback in the world. Don't worry, that's for the engagement now, Kaelon, so you can get Springbok supporters in your comments in. But what about Willie LaRue? But no, like just everywhere around the pitch, they're absolutely stacked. It was funny because watching it in the stadium at the time with Damian McKenzie, who was now kind of reflecting on it like a really well-deserved player of the match. Like, I mean, you can't, in a game where you score 18 points off the tee, you can't not give it to the out half that gets you in that position. Because I thought that from a playmaking perspective, I thought there were a couple of times where he actually made some poor decisions. There was a lot of cut back in fields where he was going into kind of like strong jacklers, strong carriers, where I thought, shit, there's an opportunity on for a turnover here. And he kind of squirreled his way out of it. I thought like Ardy Surveyor is just on another level when he hits that kind of gear. Like he's literally a one-man turnover machine. And there's nothing you can do to stop him when he just plants those feet and gets in. I think he's absolutely fantastic. The one thing I do want to talk about, because I think it played a real I think it played a really important part in how the game ultimately panned out. And I think Pádraig, you touched on it there in the sense that we picked a bench on the basis that we were going to impose our game plan early, and we just wanted guys to come on and do more of the same. Unfortunately, when you're chasing a game and you probably need more power carriers to come on and try and chase the game, the people to not bring on in that situation are 37-year-old Keane Healy and 36-year-old Peter O'Mahony. And I can't remember off the top of my head what age Ian Henderson is, but he looked like he was about 50 years old when he came on. He looked so devoid of energy coming onto the pitch, and that to me was the most frustrating part of the selection of the 23. Like I absolutely love Peter O'Mahony. I think he's a fantastic player, but this is a guy who is very much heading into the autumn of his career. He is likely to be a squad player for a fully fit Munster, although a fully fit Munster isn't something we've seen in about 3 years. So to me, to be that, he's not the guy you bring on to chase. Pete is that guy that you let go feral for 50 minutes and then you take him off for the replacement.
That's what I was going to ask you, because I feel like even when he came on with 10 minutes to go and Conor Murray and Keane Healy come on with 6 minutes to go, it's like, if I'm bringing them on, number one, you want to be in front. But number two, you almost want them to be coming on when the momentum is changing and to bring on a little bit of experience if you're going to do it at all. And even with Peter O'Mahony, I said it with yourself, Port, last week, start him, give him 50, unleash someone for 30 minutes. Because the Pete we saw in 40 last week was excellent. 10 minutes though, like Keane Healy, look, Keane Healy will break that caps record before the end of November, and good on him, he'll deserve it. But like, it's the downside of Andrew Porter being able to play 70, 80 minutes, only getting 5.
I think that, sorry, Potter, go ahead.
No, so looking across that bench, like Healy's there because there's an issue at loose head across Ireland. You know, let's be honest there. I think that's its own thing. I don't think I've never found Herring good as a sub. He's also a starter for me. That's why I think Hef would have been like I said to you earlier in the week. I think Hef's a better sub for Ireland. He's done that role for Ireland, and he plays in a team where he's expected to run a mile a minute. Like that's what his game is suited to, coming in, bringing impact. Tom O'Toole, no question. Henderson, I think Baird should have been there. Impact. You're bringing physical impact off the bench. O'Mahony is a starter. He's a moments man. He has been for like last 2 to 3 years. I call him a moments man. He might not be everywhere in a game, but he brings you big moments. And I don't think big moments can happen in a 10-15 minute cameo. I actually think Conor Murray and the kicking game with the new kicking laws is suited to coming on, as he can change a picture, do something else. I think if you want energy, you bring on Casey, you know, but that's a different thing. And then you have Frawley and Osborne, that's cover all bases. And I think Osborne deserves his shot after the summer. Yeah, I don't think the balance of our bench worked with, I think, with Ireland's trying to play more so than trying to create a different picture. I think Farrell has a tendency to keep on to his guys and guys who've done him well, and hold on to those guys and give them the benefit of the doubt. I think maybe an Izzy or a Cian Prendergast over Mahoney on the bench would have done wonders there. I think I would have gone Prendergast because he captains Connacht and he's in that kind of, he can bring you energy with a level headedness. But if Izzy got there, like you can see what he do. He's a physical, athletic guy who can carry well, offload. He can do everything, you know. So I think the balance of the bench, and I think we'll see the 23 change for next week against Argentina. The balance of the bench didn't help us try and chase a game, but I don't think we ever expected to be chasing this game.
Just 2 points
from a management point of view.
Yeah, just 2 points on that before we move off. Like, I think Izuchukwu would probably have been better in that 6th role than Tyke Byrne, and I love Tyke Byrne, but ultimately, I'm not sure if the 3 lock pack works for Ireland any more than just in theory. Look, it went well in South Africa. James Ryan, again, for the second time in a row, made a shit ton of tackles. And that is important, don't get me wrong. But ultimately, New Zealand stopped Joe McCarthy at source. James Ryan isn't much of a carrying threat. Tyke Byrne, he's been in and out of games. I think we're starting to see him just a little bit more mileage on the clock, and that's normal. I don't think he's suited playing 6. I think with an Izzy, more than Baird, and I kind of discussed this last week, I think he just brings a little bit more in physical close contact exchanges than Baird. I think that would have suited more. He can hold a little bit more weight if we need to. There was a moment there where Joe McCarthy got the ball without a screen where he's expected to throw a skip pass. He didn't know what to do with it. He just ran back against it because he's just the wrong man to have in that situation. And you'll have moments like that. But it's hard to know sometimes because like Izuchukwu, look, he lorded up an Emerging Ireland tour, but that's against a team that was playing Challenge Cup rugby. Just before we move off though, and I will get you in here in a minute, Eric, from your perspective on the props, we're likely to be without Tyke Furlong next week. We're likely to be without Tom O'Toole next week. Jeremy Luckman is currently injured. Like, is there a bit of a prop crisis going on? Is that too much? Because I know like Eric and myself would probably bat for, say, Luckman, for example, but just from your perspective.
Like, is there a prop crisis? Well, yes, there is a prop crisis in Irish rugby. I think anyone who says otherwise hasn't been looking at the age of these guys over the last 3 years. We have a crisis at loosehead. Keane Healy still playing. You know, it's who comes in at tight head is a huge, huge question. I, off the top of my head, I can't remember who are the training panelists.
Clarkson and Boyle.
Yeah.
Like, I think it's like Argentina, they're a big scrummaging team. I wouldn't throw them in, but if we have to, they're the ones who are going to doing it. Like I said, when I was talking to you last week, we could have had an extra prop across the board in that squad, you know, which wouldn't have done any harm. We're at home for a series. Um, there are props across the country who can fill in. You know, I think it's going to be a very, very rude awakening to international rugby for those young lads because they're going to see game time now, given what we've seen.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think, well, part of the reason, to digress slightly, like part of the reason for the propping crisis, in my own opinion, is because you have one province that is quite resource rich, where their third or fourth choice looseheads in, you know, Michael Milne and Jack Boyle would have been incredibly well served in the overall national picture by moving on to provinces where they would have been the number one or the number two and getting those game minutes. But that's another discussion for another day. I think, and I'm very much open to correction this, but I think there is a possibility that Ollie Jaeger might be fit and could get a call up into camp. There was word,
He's training in some capacity. It's
yeah,
just
and
what
there was
capacity.
word that he was very close to coming back from Munster against the All Blacks back on the 2nd of November. So I think if he is fit, you just have to throw him in there because I think, you know, as brilliant as it is for Tom Clarkson to be involved as a training panelist, I agree with you there, Padraig. I think it's far too much to expect of a young fella like that to throw him in against one of the best scrummaging teams in world rugby in Argentina. And as now, Argentina, given the fact that they put 50 points in Italy, knowing the law of Argentina and being shit every other game, they'll probably ship 50 points against Ireland next weekend now. But I would say if Jaeger is fit, even to come on for 30 minutes towards the end of a game for Beelum, get him in that squad because I think to ask the likes of Tom Clarkson to come in would be a very tough ask. By all means, like give him a run out against Fiji. I would love to see a lot of those training panelists like Alex Kendallin and Thomas Clarkson and Jack Boyle involved against Fiji. But I'd say if Jaeger is in any way fit and available, he's probably the next call up to the squad in terms of the next man on the rack for tight head.
If Jaeger isn't injured, I'm gonna say this and not being from a comment, like who was the tight heads that went on the Merging Ireland squad? And like that was Ainger and was it Boyle? No. Is
Ainger and Wilson, but Wilson didn't play, and it was
so they're
Edo.
the guys in that emerging Ireland squad are the guys that are on the Irish radar. So that's the kind of what I don't say it as a I want Ainger in there, and then I'm like going from an IRFU perspective. That's who they'd be looking to because they're the ones they are looking at themselves.
Well, I'd have had Wilson in the squad, but he only got like half an hour in South Africa on that tour when he should have been playing against the Bulls and the Lions for Ulster as a starter, the two best scrummaging teams in the URC. And I've ranted about this before, so I won't, but that's where, you know, what the IRFU wants doesn't really add up with what should be happening sometimes, is my only fear in it.
The one thing I do want to talk about in terms of players benching though is Kieran Frawley. And I feel so incredibly sorry for Kieran Frawley. I have absolutely nothing but pity for that young man because I think the problem that Frawley has is the exact same problem that every other Leinster out half has right now, in that they are not Johnny Sexton. For what it's worth, I don't think Kieran Frawley's an out half. I think he's a 12. I think he could be a very good playmaking 12. And when you consider that like Leo Cullen, who was the coach who dealt with him week in, week out, was very reluctant to move him to 12 as well until we first conceived the Emerging Ireland Tour because Kieran Frawley needed minutes at 10 for Ireland. And then we organised an A fixture against the All Blacks 15 because Kieran Frawley needed minutes at 10 for Ireland. He is a square peg that Andy Farrell seems to be insistent on jamming into a round hole over and over again. And I think to I think to have expected anything more of him than what he delivered on on Friday night is incredibly unfair. I think there are I think there are other players on the island of Ireland. I think, for example, like efforts being made to bring Aidan Morgan, who's IQ, over to Ulster. Like, to me, it seems baffling that he wasn't included in this squad even as a training panelist. When he would have been on like the IQ radar. But I just feel nothing but pity for Kieran Frawley because I think he is being put in a position. And look, no one is ever going to turn around to their national coach and say, please don't pick me in this position. I don't want to be involved. Of
I'd play
course, he
tomorrow.
wants to be involved.
I'd play tomorrow if I was asked. You know, like
Yeah, absolutely.
but I think he's Frawley's got the as I mentioned to Clayton, he's got the Ian Madigan problem.
Yeah.
You know, he can do a bit too
Exactly.
much, and that's kind of it. He can kind of fit into anywhere, and he's got that Ian Madigan problem where he has all the tools to be a really good rugby player, but I don't think he's got the tools to be not. I haven't seen him have the tools to be a very good 10. I think if you want a 10 on the bench, put Sam on there. He's there for a reason. I think he would have been better off getting crucified against New Zealand and learning hard lessons than as a 10, because we want him as a 10, and that's what we need is another 10. You know, Connacht aren't developing a 10 anytime soon. You know, Munster have Crowley in there. Morgan's in Ulster now, but I still think he's having the learnings that Josh Ioane's having in Connacht of like, oh, they play the game differently up here. I've got to learn that before he can be in an Ireland camp, I would suggest. So I think if you have one other out and out 10 on your team, get him on the pitch when you need an out and out 10 playing.
But again, again with Sam Prendergast, the challenge comes there in terms of where does Sam continue to get meaningful minutes at club level? Because early doors for Leinster, and actually, do you know what? It's going to be very interesting to see who Leinster pick as they're starting out half for the Champions Cup games come December. Because if it ends up being Frawley, then okay, he'll continue to be picked in Ireland squads because he's Leinster's number one. If it ends up being Prendergast, like Prendergast hasn't, I would argue, and I'm very much open to correction on this because I'm not minutely following every one of Leinster's URC games. Prendergast hasn't even been giving a lot of like meaningful minutes against challenging teams in the URC so far this season. Um, and to me, again, it comes back down to that thing of hoarding resources. Like Sam Prendergast was all set to move on loan to Connacht at the start of this season, and it would have been a fantastic move for him. He would have played week in, week out. He would have gained exposure. It would have accelerated his development. And then Leo Cullen came whispering the sweet nothings about how he'd get meaningful minutes if he stayed at Leinster. Like Leo's a fantastic man manager in that respect because he's brilliant at convincing guys why they shouldn't move. But ultimately, and this is one thing I would hope David Nucifora will do as the new performance director, is actually encourage meaningful interprovincial moves and spread the talent around a small bit more. But yeah, I wanted to point that out because like Kieran Frawley will get pilloried for look what is kind of a 30 minutes to forget. At 30 minutes to forget for him. Would I have called Crowley aside that quickly? Probably not. But at the same time, I have nothing but pity for Kieran Frawley because he is being put in the most unenviable position where he has been told, here's your opportunity for Ireland, but it feels like he's been given that opportunity with one hand tied behind his back. And I have actually think you've hit the nail on the head there, Padraig, by describing him as being equivalent to Ian Madigan in the sense that he's good at a lot of different things, but he's not necessarily good at all the things you need him to be good at to play it out half.
It's massive. We might need to skip over New Zealand part because we're running a little bit long. If you are an absolute cynic, and there are cynics who listen or watch this, skip past the next part because I know what Porrick's answer is going to be. If you're an internal optimist, turn it up. Porrick, I'm going to ask you, should we be worried? And I know the answer you're going to give, so hit me with it.
Not completely worried. I think if you're on a when an Ireland team plays a second game in 6 months to that level, the first South Africa test as well wasn't a good enough performance. They backed it up and got the win the second game. But that is now 2 games that we haven't played to our best on the back of Six Nations, where we were sliding in performances those 5 matches went on. I think there has to be an element of, are we as good as we think we are, thinking in us. But does it say, do I worry and panic? No, I think there's plenty of talent in that 35-man squad to bring up the level of performance again. I think Andy Farrell's a good enough man manager that he can bring up the level of performance again. He hasn't had to go to the well yet as a coach. Here's the first time I think as a coach, head coach for Ireland, he's had to really go to the well and go, is this good enough? Are we performing well enough? Those proper hard conversations that you hear with everything's happened in Munster and in Ulster last season of coaches having to go to that well of we're not doing well enough. If you go there once too often, you can turn a change room. He hasn't had to go there properly yet. So because of that, there's so many elements where you go, all right, this is our first proper speed bump of the Andy Farrell era, the last 12 months. World Cup aside, like we had lofty goals, but I think performance level, we're now at our first proper speed bump. I think that's a team there that can change things. I don't think they do think there's a one too many ex players too close to the group in that training group. I think Paul O'Connell hasn't shown he's giving us enough as a line out coach. I don't know what Johnny Sexton's doing, whispering sweet nothings to everyone in there. I want to see our attack improve. I'm going to let that stand because that's a completely new coaching facet for now. So I'm not going to really go in on it. But yes, there are worries. I have more optimisms than worries about Ireland. But if there's not questions being asked, but if you don't have a niggling thought in the back of your mind, are we as good as we think we are? Then you would have to be completely blindly optimistic. I'm not completely blindly optimistic. I do have the elements of I don't see us. We're not like there's no point throwing the baby out the bathwater. Crowley had good moments. Gibson Park was playing well. There's if you look across what we've said today, our defense held up really well. We didn't adapt to New Zealand. If we had, we would have won. And if as woulda, coulda, shoulda, coulda, and all that type of stuff. But that's fundamentally what we've said is they had power in certain areas we didn't adjust. They had a very clever defensive tactic which completely confused us, and we never adjusted to. But if we fix a few small things, increase accuracy 5%, that's a different game. There's a lot more that Ireland can control for the next 3 weeks that they can fix than there isn't. And that's where I think why I'm optimistic. If we were there going, we got beat here, beat here, beat here, beat here, but we can't see a fix for them, then yes, be worried. But we can see a fix for the line out. Like I think it's almost overcomplicated at the moment. Simplify it. Be a bit smarter, punch smarter in certain areas, but there's fixes in that performance to make us better next week, better the week after, and better against Australia. That's why I'm not worried, but I'm cautious.
That's very fair because I think Ireland started this year with one of the best wins of the Andy Farrell era in Marseille. Yes, France went down to 14 men. Paul Williams tried to get sent off 3 times, but that happened. Like, it was an unbelievable performance. They went up against Italy and Wales and played really, really well. The England game wasn't bad, but it wasn't of the standard they set. The Scotland game was very limp. First test South Africa was not good. Second test was better. And then there's this one. So I feel like this year, I can't say it's an overwhelming success because I think when you're one of, there's a gulf between Ireland, France, and the rest coming into this year's Six Nations. It's not the same now, but there was a gulf. So it was first or second, realistically, second at worst. They won it. I think that's par for the course. 1 win in South Africa, par for the course. I do still think it had to be 4 wins in November. I think Ireland had to, to just kind of reaffirm their status just to themselves as much as anything. Because again, last year's loss was so tough. But if they do get 3 wins, I wouldn't be overly concerned. But as he said, lineup does need to be fixed to a degree. Attack needs more time to be bedded in. I think I've seen an awful lot of people, not all with any real basis, some of it, absolute whataboutery, kind of take aim at the outside backs. But it was not the game where 9-15 decided it. Realistically, like set piece decided a lot more. The back row decided a lot more than 9-15. And on that, Eric, going into next week, it's Argentina up next. We might have some injuries at prop. We might see some rotation. There will be calls for changes. There'll be calls for 15 changes because some people treat test games like they're the barbarians. But for you, what way would you go?
I am a good deal more pessimistic about Ireland's prospects heading into next Six Nations. And the reason why I'm pessimistic is because I don't trust Andy Farrell to be the coach to have those hard conversations, and to be involved in like that period of adversity and like really rolling up the sleeves to get involved in like change of a national squad, because Andy Farrell has been profoundly successful since the beginning of his arrival into the Ireland head coach job, and hasn't had to have a lot of those moments where he's had to have those difficult conversations. Okay, fine. His initial year as head coach was quite challenging, but the vast majority of his time and tenure. The other thing I think that's crucial here is that Andy Farrell has the November window to fix this, because then he's off as coach of the Lions, and it's Simon Easterby's problem come 2025. So the huge cynic in me wonders, is he just going to leave it up to Simon Easterby to be the one to fix it while he heads off coaching the Lions? Is there potentially part of him that already has one eye out the gap there? In terms of changes that I would make heading into Argentina, some of them will be injury enforced. Obviously, like there is absolutely no way Tom O'Toole is playing next week, given the way he had to be helped off. He had to be helped off against New Zealand. Um, I could see Ollie Yeager coming into the squad if he is fit and benching for Finlay Bealham. If not, it will probably be Tom Clarkson, who ends up benching. Or you potentially call in a loose head and you get Keane Healy covering tight head, as has happened for Leinster and Ireland in the past. I would certainly cycle out Henderson for either Baird or Izuchukwu. I'd love to see Izuchukwu get a shot. But I'd suspect he'll
I'd
go.
start him, to be honest. I'd give him a start at 6. The only thing is, if I start him at 6, I'm starting him with Byrne, Doris, Van der Fleet, like the full array around him. But I would
Yeah.
definitely give him a shot.
The other thing as well is I think we need to give Joe McCarthy a break. And I think if anything, I would probably get Joe McCarthy benching and get him coming in with fresh legs in the last 30 minutes. I still think, and it feels like he's been around for ages, but I think we're in danger of giving Joe McCarthy a bout of James Ryannitis, in the sense that there is far too much pressure placed on him for an early age. He ends up kind of hitting a ceiling, and then his performances will end up plateauing. From a rugby IQ and from an intelligence of play, he is still incredibly raw in terms of top level experience. But like even to the point where the stadium announcer announced him as Big Joe McCarthy in the Aviva on Friday, there really is this almost mythological sense of his physicality that has been built up. And again, I think you're just putting lads on a hiding to nothing by building up this completely unsustainable level of hype around them. One thing I do want to talk about in terms of changes, and sorry, Kaelon, because I was at the game on Friday, is the IRFU needs to seriously think about how it markets and manages autumn internationals and Six Nations, and how it manages the atmosphere within the stadium on Friday. Because I'll be perfectly honest, the game on Friday was the straw that broke the camel's back for me, and I won't be going back to an Ireland home game anytime soon. The vast majority of the crowd there were profoundly disinterested in what was actually going on out in the pitch. And ultimately, that's because people are being priced out of tickets. The cheapest ticket for Ireland versus New Zealand was €140. And ultimately, what ends up happening with a lot of the November internationals games is the tickets end up a lot in the hands of people who think it's cool to be seen there, as opposed to actually wanting to be there. Um,
The hack on Instagram type thing.
the hack on Instagram type of thing, but just simple things like, there were like very visible levels of like public drunkenness at the game, like, people getting sick, people up and down for pints all the time. There was really manufactured elements of like trying to generate atmosphere, like pumping in the noise of someone banging a drum, pointing in chants. I got a wonderful opportunity to deliver fantastic shareholder value for Aer Lingus when I was challenged by an Aer Lingus ad to see if I could shout louder than a jet engine. And just simple things like jeering New Zealand kicks. It's just like a lot of it. And I know I sound like one of those hashtag rugby values bores, but a lot of it was just quite unsavory and would be really, really off-putting for anyone who wanted to go to that type of a game who actually enjoyed rugby.
It didn't come across well on TV, and I keep coming back to it. Like my fondest experience in the Aviva Stadium was Munster Leinster 2023. Yes, people say, well, obviously the result, but the atmosphere, it was 30,000 people. It was 30,000 people who wanted to be there. The atmosphere was really good from start to finish. We just don't get it at Ireland games. And ultimately, I think it's imperative now that if we're going to continue with this pricing, that we move the women's games and the under 20s games around the country, because it's the only chance that kids are going to get to go to games. Like my school is the school I went to was an established rugby school, always got a good few tickets for games, schoolboy tickets, which is a great system. Not every school does. So it is imperative that we keep giving a chance to go see, the Emily Murphy Crows or, the Sam Prendergasts at the 20s or whoever it is around the country, because it has become an issue. And like we don't want to go full, Jerry Thornley article, but like it's an issue. Like you compare it to, Italy played Udinese last night and the atmosphere was cracking until the contest was over. Same with France at every game. Twickenham is Twickenham. The Principality will be rocking even though Wales are in the doldrums. Murrayfield will be absolutely hopping. I feel like everyone's going to start looking at us and going, we're the odd one out at this stage, which is really disappointing because if you watch URC games every weekend, like the three of us would, you'll see Kingspan Ravenhill is always, belting. It's always a great atmosphere. The RDS has improved its atmosphere a huge amount in recent years. Thomond or Musgrave is always really well attended and really loud. And the sports ground gets the maximum out of everything it has, even though it's the smallest, it is one of the loudest.
Hang on a second, no, Kale, on Virgin Media Park and the Dexcom, you have to deliver the shareholder value there.
Okay, Virgin
Actually, you
Media.
don't say them properly. You don't even get press credentials. That's why all the press do it.
Right, so the Dexcom Stadium in Galway and the Virgin Media Park in Cork. There you go. Now you're happy. But you see what I mean. Like there is rugby fans across the country. I'd say Mary's Turn Europe probably had a better atmosphere. Yes. That's the reality of where we're going with this, and it's disappointing. It is disappointing, and
Like,
hopefully we do see a pick up.
Friday Night Light should be the easiest atmosphere to create, to be honest. Like it just should be. I've never been like my rugby life was going to Galway in the sports ground when it was a sports ground. Now Dexcom, I don't live near Galway anymore, so I go half as much as I want to. But they the Friday Night Lights there was always the best atmosphere, just other than 5 o'clock on a Saturday, which is that sweet spot for everyone. But I understand they are if you're trying to get as much money in as possible because I think the three of us would all agree we want to see professional women's rugby progress in Ireland. And until professional women's rugby can earn tickets of 70 to 80 euro per person, the men's game is going to pay for everything. Like,
Yes.
sadly, that's just the way at the moment it is. So the RFU are going to bleed everyone dry until there's more revenue streams. Just I hate talking like that type of way. Please, it's not me. But until that money, that funding level, self funding level can come up, that's where the money has to be made. I know why they're trying to create atmosphere artificially in those scenarios. Because if you look at the RDS, it's a lot of the same tricks they're using, same things they're doing because they're very close to each other. They talk to each other like this works for us, might work for you. I'm pretty sure it's the same stadium announcer doing both, you know?
Oh no,
So,
not anymore. It's TikTok superstar Kigo is doing Leinster's PA right now. I had the pleasure of listening to him in Croke Park a couple of weeks ago.
okay. So it was, though, last year or the year before, they were the same guy. If you went to an Irish
Mm.
match, you're hearing the guy from the RDS, So there's crossover there just by nature of they're 100 meters apart, the 200 meters apart.
It's a long way though. When Leinster had to move games there a few years ago, it's a long trek. It's actually longer than you think.
Oh, it's a huge way game. No, but like, so obviously there's things that work in the RDS with people with kids who love that flashing lights and atmosphere and fireworks. That's like I had my nephew up for the weekend. He talks to me about cock matches. He hasn't mentioned rugby once or a try once. He's mentioned meeting players, lights and music. So they're the things that are working at the younger generation. They go, we'll do that at the matches too, and see what happens. And it doesn't work for adults, obviously, and there needs to be a middle ground where this can work of getting money of people who want to be there for the event, but keeping and creating an atmosphere for people who want to watch rugby. And on Friday, the team didn't hold up their end of the bargain either. I think that's 30% of it. I think there's 70% then is what's happening in the stadium and the fans and the clientele. But if the team aren't performing on the pitch, if the game doesn't feel tense and it doesn't feel like it's down to the wire and everything's on the line, then it's hard to get buy-in. Because we've all been at games where I've been at Italy games in the Aviva and we've won 50-0 and everyone's switching off because it's 20-0, you know. But I've been in the Aviva I've been in stadiums for 25, 24, and it's hopping because this is a close match and everyone's giving everything, and you can just get a sense from the pitch of something special, you know. So it's not all just one thing. It's the whole thing of, if you just go the ticket prices, goes, yeah, the ticket prices were too much. I got the email in because I coach in Nace. They asked me, did I want to take it? I was like, no, I'm not paying €280 for me and my wife to go to a match, you know? Like, that's not happening. So, like, I get that reasoning. It's just when the pitch doesn't deliver, like, say James Lowe got a 50-22, that was cracking, fist pump, crowd actually reacted to it, but then nothing happened. So we couldn't build on the good atmosphere the moments we're creating. So it's also, once the few times the crowd got engaged, the next thing that happened didn't keep them engaged either. So I'm not saying that's right or wrong. I'm just saying it was also a factor of what was there. I wasn't in the stadium. I'm only seeing of what I got
Yeah.
through the telly.
I just want to touch on your point about the clientele there as well. And like, I'm not going to resort to like any stereotyping of certain cohorts of rugby fans. But
Do it.
a 10 past 8 kickoff on a Friday is profoundly unfair to anyone who's not living within a 80-kilometer radius of Dublin.
Completely.
Like, particularly for people who want to take children to the match, like, that is a tight, like, if you wanted to come up from Killarney or Cork up to that game and you wanted to bring kids with you, that is an extraordinarily tight turnaround to try and get the kids out of school, get them home, get them fed, and get up to the game afterwards. Whereas it's extremely easy for someone living within Dublin City to hop on a dart and get out there. And ultimately, with ticket prices that are only accessible to a certain socioeconomic cohort and a kickoff time, that means that it's ruled out as an option for a massive degree of rugby fans coming from Belfast, coming from Galway, coming from Cork, coming from Waterford. Like, that to me is ultimately a recipe for disaster. And like, I know we like, the Irish media sounds like a cracked record when they talk about like the jack in the box of getting up and down from your seat in the Aviva because people are going in and out for points. But for fuck's sake, like, I mean, Ireland were on an attacking maul 5 meters out, and I had two people stand up in front of me to go out and get points.
That's
Like,
head wrecking. No, I get it.
totally head
I
wrecking.
completely get it. I completely get it. Like, I'm not trying to, but like, say it's like, and if you listen to like Gavin Cooney's the 42 podcast where they kind of talk about a specific subject, you know, this week was, is Ireland rugby country? You know, it was a very interesting listen. They talk specifically about the men's game. It doesn't cover the men, like the country of Ireland as a demographic, as like socioeconomic. It doesn't, like, it just doesn't, where the women's game does, and didn't talk about that. That's fair enough. They're very much focused on the men's game. So yeah, I completely understand those factors. And as someone who lived in, who's from Connemara, who going to a concert growing up was a 3-day event, I get it, you know, like, I completely get it. So um I'm not trying to, like, I get your argument, you know. It's hard, you know, when you're trying to earn money. I think Friday night games, if you're trying to keep rugby and keep people from every area of Ireland able to go, don't work and shouldn't
Yeah.
be a thing. Completely, I will never, like, I that's just you know. But
Yeah. Uh,
so it's a hard one when you need to make as much money as possible, you know, factor as well. I gladly don't have to be in that boardroom or office making those decisions. I get to be like you and bitch about it afterwards.
100%. And just one small thing that I'll touch on from like what I thought was a big miss from the RFU in terms of logistics POV is that, like, I've been very lucky to see the All Blacks play twice in 2 weeks. I got to see them take on Munster in Thomond Park. I got to see them take on Ireland in the Aviva. Both games featured a pre-match light show. Munster emailed supporters multiple times 2 weeks in advance saying, don't forget to download the app, don't forget to download the app, don't forget to download the app. I went into the Ireland game, and all I knew about downloading an app for a pre-stadium, pre-match light show was scan this QR code and download a different app to the one that Munster are using for their pre-match light show. So I just think from a logistics perspective as well, in terms of, and ultimately, like, it proved to be a fairly pathetic affair. I'd say about a third of the stadium at most were actually into it with their phones. And listen, I know I probably sound like a grumpy old rugby purist. I completely agree with you, Padraig, that like you need things like that to get like the kids into it, to get the casuals into it, to generate a bit of atmosphere. So long as it's like not Mike McCarthy wearing a Viking hat doing a Viking clap before a match, like I'm happy. I'm willing to give anything a go. But sorry, Kaelan, I know that's quite divergent from your initial point about like Ireland being like should Ireland be worried for next week? But I think just ultimately live rugby in the Aviva Stadium will continue to be an off-putting experience for a lot of people based on current factors that determine who are the people who go to these games most of the times and what is the atmosphere generated at these games.
And it's another Friday night match against a team that, in Irish lore, isn't as someone to take as seriously as the All Blacks. I don't see that atmosphere from the same cohort, possibly, of fans improving.
And then the week after is Fiji, and the week after there's URC games where the hardcore fan is going to be at the provinces. So it's not going to improve this window. That's the thing. And it's really frustrating. And like, I was at the college football game in Dublin this year. I didn't have to get out. I'd say 3 times I got up out of my seat in a longer game, in a more stop-start game in the same venue. There's a load of different factors. The price is a massive one. Like, should there be more kids able to get these games? Clubs get tickets, but clubs are selling off these tickets because they need to pay for something, and they're raffling them off. And like, we wish that wasn't the case. Like, not every school gets tickets, and like it's such a big thing, and we'll probably discuss it more as the years go on, because as you said, Pádraig, they're trying to fund the women's game by whatever means possible, and this is the easiest means, because realistically, Ireland could probably sell out the Aviva at €180 a pop. If we're being honest with ourselves, they probably could for every game, but we're not quite there. But we have ran on, and I'm really thankful to Eric and Pádraig for a brilliant conversation. Again, if you are an optimist, I don't know what you're taking away from this. If you're a cynic, you're probably licking your lips at certain points, especially the ending. But my thanks to everyone for tuning in and for listening. We will turn our attention to Argentina all this week, so make sure and subscribe to listen to that. But for now, and until next time, again, thank you very much to the lads and to everyone. But until next time, take it easy.